This obviously stops short of a full boycott. Is this the kind of fine balancing act where they can diplomatically make their point, but still obviously allowing US athletes to participate?
That's exactly right. By doing a diplomatic boycott, the idea is to try to prevent China from engaging in what a lot of people these days are calling sports washing. In other words, using these big sports mega events to try to launder their international reputation on the world stage. These events can be a chance for world leaders to engage in grin and grip photo ops and that sort of thing. By not sending diplomats, the idea is that you curtail that kind of practice while at the same time shining a bright light on the human rights abuses that are happening in China right now.
Does the fact that the WTA has recently essentially chosen Peng Shuai and what they believe to be concern over her safety and standing up against the leadership in China, does that kind of give a bit more, I guess, credibility and fire behind global sports organizations, which until this point haven't exactly been great about, choosing human rights over the lucrative Chinese market, right?
You're exactly right. I mean, the fact that we are all stepping back and going, wow, that's kind of amazing that the WTA took a stand like that, speaks to the rest of the morality on the terrain of sports in the United States, but also across the world. And so it's a sharp contrast what the WTA has decided to do with what the International Olympic Committee has chosen to do. Every single step of the way, they have chosen to side with the Chinese authorities. They had a 30-minute phone conversation with Peng Shuai, and afterwards, they said, hey, she's just fine. Anybody who thought about that situation for more than a couple seconds could realize that just because you had a pleasant 30-minute video conversation with somebody does not mean that they're doing fine. And so the WTA deserves credit for standing up for its integrity and for its belief system. The International Olympic Committee, on the other hand, not so much. And that is alarming for a lot of people going into these Beijing Olympics. After all, I think it's fair to say we're living in what we might call the athlete empowerment era right now, where more and more we're seeing athletes take a socially conscious, sometimes even sharply political stand on the global stage. And the International Olympic Committee sent a message to all those people who might be going to Beijing to compete, who might want to say something politically, that, you know what, we might not have your back at the end of the day, kind of like we didn't really have the back of Peng Shuai.
So what does a diplomatic boycott really mean for Beijing? And could we see more countries joining?
Well, that's the next big question that we're all going to be keeping an eye out for, is that will U.S. allies jump on board with the diplomatic boycott? That wouldn't surprise me in the least. In terms of your question about what this means for Beijing, probably not that much. It'll ramp up the verbal volleys that the countries have already been exchanging in regards to the Olympics. There's a whole lot more at stake than the Olympics themselves. The bigger relationship between the United States and China right now is quite perilous. And in the United States, where I'm coming to you from, leaders across the political spectrum have essentially made China into a political punching bag. That can be really dangerous. All manner of irresponsible things are said about China by elected officials with no support whatsoever. And so hopefully this diplomatic boycott will stay within the realm of verbal volleys and not escalate. But as I say, there's a lot more at stake, and we still have a couple months until the Beijing Olympics actually happen.
How do international sports organizations walk that fine line between trying to do business in a very lucrative market, but at the same time listening to their athletes and also keeping their social consciousness in order to really uphold human rights?
You're right. It is a fine line. It is very difficult to walk that fine line as well. I would reframe the thinking just a little bit. I mean, these organizations have all manner of wonderful ideas in their charter. Take, for example, the Olympic Charter. It talks about the dignity of humanity, the dignity of the individual. It even mentions human rights one time in the context of sports. They're basically saying, the International Olympic Committee is, all that goes out the window. And then, in fact, making money really trumps that. And so that is really what's at stake here, is are these organizations actually going to stand by the big ideas that they supposedly believe in? Or at the end of the day, are they going to just take the money and run? So far, what we're seeing with the International Olympic Committee is they're more than happy to take the money and run.
To play devil's advocate, there are obviously issues with a lot of countries and cities that play host to these major sporting events, right? I think China would say, well, the United States doesn't have a great track record when it comes to these things. Los Angeles is hosting games, and Qatar, obviously, with the World Cup, a lot of human rights concerns there as well. Can these major sporting events be used as an impetus to try and, with carrot rather than stick, encourage these countries to do better?
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I'm really glad that you raised it. After all, I'm coming to you from the United States, where we have a humanitarian crisis in plain sight in the form of homelessness up and down the West Coast where I live. We have Guantanamo Bay still open, people there without charges. We have families getting separated at the border. No question about it, the United States does not have a pristine human rights record in itself. Those are totally fair points that China is raising. The difference, at least according to people from Human Rights Watch and other human rights organizations, is that what we're seeing right now is crimes against humanity playing out during the actual Olympic Games. And so that is the difference. Whether this can be a lever for making change, the examples are few and far between. Some people have made the argument that in hosting the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, that helped jumpstart the democracy in that country. But really, we hear a lot more people talking about how great this is going to be for democracy, but fewer results. I mean, hey, I'm a social scientist, so I need the evidence, and there just isn't a lot of evidence that giving dictatorships the Olympics is going to help them with their human rights record.